Over the course of the session. It's one of the reasons why we're coming so late with the bill. Is that we've gotten them to a point where they do not object to it. And secondly, it does not increase any burden on any taxi cab owner or any owner of a medallion. It only provides procedures for a city to follow when they're going to increase the number of medallions to limit the very serious negative economic consequences that could follow if a sudden increase in the number of medallions were to come forward. That's all the bill does, and nothing more. And if there are further questions, be happy to take them. Otherwise, perhaps we can keep waiting for additional people to arrive, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, order number 6.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Why are you so worried about a whole bunch of additional medallions being issued?
We're not under the present mayor. It's not a concern at all. This is a
3 more years of the current mayor, don't we?
As a resident of the city of Atlanta, I am very excited about that very fact because I think the city is moving in wonderful directions. But the city has not always had mayors as phenomenal as Mayor Franklin, and has not always had mayors that will have the same sensitivity to the economic consequences of the city's regulatory actions. It's not about limiting competition. It's not about market share. It's about the economic consequences that would follow if a future board or mayor were to flood the market with these licenses.
Let me pursue this. We had previous mayors before Mayor Franklin, be they good or bad, whatever. Am I to assume all of them were wonderful because this legislation never came before us in the past?
I'm certainly not prepared to concede that every previous mayor of the city of Atlanta was wonderful.
I'm just wondering because you have a concern for the future, but yet we didn't have this problem previously, and I just wondered why are we suddenly looking at this and finding a problem?
Well, again,
and trying to, this is sort of like, is this really necessary?
Well, the only goal of the bill is to provide an economic stability for these CP&Cs that have, by virtue of the city's regulatory actions, nothing that the state's done and nothing this bill does, that have obtained value, and it helps. I was speaking with Representative Lackley before we convened. It helps someone who can't afford presently perhaps to get in the taxi cab business to be able to borrow against the value of the license. It's no different at all from a business loan that if you have business assets against which you can borrow, and you can only borrow against an asset if its value is relatively secure, and that's the only goal of the legislation.
If in fact we were to have another Olympics here, or a Super Bowl or something to that effect, I'm not sure that we have an adequate staff of taxi cabs, and if there was a need to increase more than 10%, we would have locked their hands.
Actually, Representative, I would disagree with that because all the bill says is that if you're going to increase more than 10%, you merely have to certify, not do a study, not convince a court, not convince some state agency. The city only has to certify that in the city's judgment, it will not result in lower quality service or in a significant diminution of the value. Plainly, if we had an event like that coming, we would have several years to prepare for it, and it might well be that the city would want to ensure an adequate supply of taxis. And if that happened, the city would have several years to address that, not only by the 10% under which this bill doesn't even apply, but even so, the city could very easily say, we have the Super Bowl coming, we have an Olympics coming, therefore we certify that there's an additional need for these, and the value of the medallions won't go down because there's going to be that much increased ridership. And that's all the city has to do is merely certify, not get anyone's permission, which is one of the...
certifies for the airport?
I believe that's the city's taxi cab commission. I believe that's right.
I see a head nodding in the background. I'll sort of take that as an affirmative. Is that correct?
But
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, I just, just want to clarify again, this is just strictly the city of Atlanta.
Yes, sir. In section,
How does this work? I mean, how do the other counties have?
If you don't mind, we're on television or computer or whatever they call it.
Okay.
Get out in computer land and make sure everybody can hear you.
Okay. In other words, do the other counties around here have the same type of setup with the medallions and things, or is this just the city?
it's only the city of Atlanta that has elected through its home rule power to limit the number of CP&Cs that it will issue, and it has done so by ordinance at, I believe, 1,600. And no other city or county has done that, to my knowledge.
This probably doesn't fit this particular thing, but does the city of Atlanta have on their taxi cab services requirements that they have to have driver's licenses and they have to have safe vehicles and this type of stuff? Because a lot of these people apparently don't know how to drive and don't, and so on. And I see this in other areas, and I was concerned. But
The city, and of course, keep in mind that the city only has jurisdiction over taxi cab service within the municipal boundaries of the city of Atlanta. But absolutely, the city of Atlanta's ordinance is very well done, and it provides the insurance, a certain age of the vehicles, a certain level of familiarity with the streets in the city, a certain English language proficiency. There's a whole host of things that are required, and this bill doesn't change that. It doesn't add to or subtract from that home rule power. All right, absolutely.
What number are you?
8. I think I'm on. Quick question for you. So what you're talking about is putting those who would be interested in providing taxi cab service under a quota system.
Actually, Representative, the city of Atlanta has established an ordinance regulatory scheme for requiring medallions. They have one of the many ways in which they regulate the quality of service is to limit the number of licenses that they will issue. Most major cities do this, in fact, although in Georgia it's only Atlanta that has elected to do that, again, to my knowledge, and they have done that at 1,600. This bill doesn't change that. This bill, and it doesn't enhance that or detract from it. It simply says if a city has elected to do that, if it wants to increase them, it must do so gradually so as not to create negative economic consequences for the insurance companies and lenders that either use those assets as surplus or to meet capital reserve requirements or to meet collateral requirements.
Okay, in regard to that, what you're telling me, Atlanta's got a quota system on the number of taxi cabs they can have during the year, and then at some point in time they can increase 10% a year, unless there's an extenuating circumstances like the Olympics or something like that, and then they could do it. Now, but we're talking about those other years. What you've got is a quota, correct?
Well,
you got a quota. You can only have so many, correct?
The ordinance doesn't limit how many one person can own or how many a corporation can own. It simply says the total number of outstanding can only be 1,600. So I wouldn't think that would fall under the definition of a quota. A quota to me would mean you representatives can only have 10 or only have 20 or something like that. There's nothing in the city's ordinance that provides that.
Well, is that going to, with that limitation, is that going to cause a unreasonable inflation rate on the value of these medallions?
I don't believe so, Representative, and here's why.
Well, let me give you an example.
Yes, sir.
And there's a second scenario of this thing, too, and I've seen this happen. When you have quotas, then somebody who owns a quota sells that service to somebody else pays them, and they keep the quota, which is informing in some cases. And it becomes, the average person cannot go out and buy that quota because it's just so it's just unreal, the value of these things. So I'm concerned that what you're doing is when you're selling quotas or medallions and you limit the number that can be had, that you have a tremendous inflation rate as far as the value of those medallions when somebody else wants to get into it, and it may stop them altogether.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, if I may, again, there is nothing in this bill and nothing in the City of Atlanta's ordinance that establishes a quota of CP&Cs for any individual person. Theoretically, there could be 1,600 owners and 1,600 licenses. One person can own one person can own 1,000. I mean, they don't, but but they could. The only provision in the City of Atlanta's ordinance is that the total number issued to everyone not exceed 1,600, and that's in place now. And nothing in this bill changes that.
Well, if this is relating just to Atlanta, why isn't this local legislation?
Well, because I'm saying the bill only applies to Atlanta now. If Representative Henson, your question last week was on DeKalb County. Does this affect DeKalb? It does not, because DeKalb County has not chosen to exercise home rule powers or to pass an ordinance to limit the number of CP&Cs. If it did in some future date, then this legislation would apply, and that's why it's drawn as general statute as opposed to local legislation.
Let me say that it's a general bill, and that's what it's been treated as. I don't know if you could do it through local legislation or not. Would the state law allow that, Ward?
I think since they're amending general law, they would have to go with general legislation as they're doing now, Mr. Smith.
But if they wanted to do a local, change the local charter some way, I guess they could do that, couldn't they?
I think they could, Mr. Chairman, but I'm not sure that they could amend this general law.
Well, I know they couldn't. I know they couldn't amend the general law through local leg, and I don't know if you could do actually what they're trying to do through local legislation or not, but whether they could or not, they've chosen not to, and it's before us as a general bill. What number are you? 6. You on?
Mr. Chairman, we seem to have a lot of questions about this bill, and in all fairness to the author of the bill, I think this is an issue that he's brought forth, and he's had reasons that he's brought it forth, the folks that he's worked with and all, and I respect that. And I'd really like to see us, and actually I'd like to make a motion that we move to do a study committee on this during the interim so that we can be better informed. We could have other governments. We have a new city of Sandy Springs. I don't know if and how this would affect them or what they might be doing given the fact that they're newly formed. And they're also in Fulton County. And it might be a very good bill. I don't know. I really and truly don't know. And I would like to work on this over the summer, to look at it. We could bring it back in the fall. You know, as we said, Mr. Highsmith. I'm so sorry. Highsmith has said that, the concern is with the term for Mayor Franklin. Given that we could look at it at the beginning of next year, we're still addressing his concern with the time frame. We're giving a good validity to the bill. We'll come back well informed, and we won't have all these questions, and we'll be well informed about it and know the right direction to go. I'd really like to do that, and I'd like to make a motion to that.
Well, a motion will be out of order right now, but we'll get to that point a little later if we need to, but that may be a possibility. Mr. Lackley, did you have something? What, you're 7?
Yes. I was just a couple of further questions. The previous Representative Henson made a comment about Sandy Springs, and all of a sudden I look here and I see some of the sponsors were heavily involved with Sandy Springs. Is this some way, some method to assist Sandy Springs in their taxi cab issues?
No, sir.
Okay. Second question, who is it that's interested in putting this bill forward?
There's some.
Says lobbyists, and I don't use that as a dirty word, because lobbyists to me are an asset, and I appreciate it. So who is lobbying for this bill?
My client is Yellow Cab of Georgia, which is one of the larger taxi cab companies in the city of Atlanta, but also involved are several other parties who again have an economic interest in making sure that there's not a lurch one way or the other in the economic value of these things.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you, Robert. Anybody want to speak? Anybody else got anything they want to say about it? Mo, you got any comments? Okay. Mr. Chairman, you want to conclude your remarks? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I made it clear in the beginning that this was an issue for those who were investing in the cabs. The collateral issue, that's what this is all about. And that's why the legislation was introduced. Mr. Chairman, I ask for the favorable consideration, but if the committee so chooses to study it during the interim.
Let me before we do that, if you want to return to your seat, let me see informally where we're at with the committee. I think we've got about all that's going to show up, and we do have a quorum. The bill is on the table right now. How many of y'all support, we're taking an informal poll, this is not a vote, but informal poll, how many of you support the legislation and would like to, would vote in the affirmative if we took it off the table? 1, 2, 2. How many of you would be opposed if we took it off the table? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 abstention. The bill stays on the table. Meeting adjourned.